The second round of the college football playoffs are upon us, and we have a great slate of games ahead of us. I am very excited for this weekend of football. The best slog getting through the first week with all the SEC fans and the blowouts, but this week is going to be special. Starting things off, Boise State taking on Penn State. And of course, we know what the story of this game is going to be. Can Ashton Jeanty, 1v11 Abdul Carter and the Penn State defense, can he carry this team to a decisive victory? The upset no one is predicting, touchdown underdogs, and unfortunately for me, the answer to that question is no. Now, I think Jeanty's supporting cast is getting a little bit underappreciated. They're not quite as bad as you think, particularly their offensive line. The Boise State offensive line should have been a finalist for the Joe Moore Award. They have played very well, opened up a ton of gaps for Jeanty to burst through and explode. But against the Penn State front seven, which is phenomenal at sniffing out the run, which hindered the Ohio States of the world in the run game, which didn't let Oregon have their way on the ground, I just don't think it's going to happen. They are operating at a supreme talent disadvantage in the trenches. This game is going to be very hard for Boise State to get those pushes, open those gaps, and get Jeanty any room out of the backfield to succeed. Now, I still think he's going to break Barry Sanders' record this game. I still think he will have production, just because I don't see Boise abandoning the run, even if they fall down by a few scores, but I don't think their defense can match Penn State, the two-headed monster in their backfield. Drew Aller, the best tight end in college football. It's just not going to be enough to keep this game from getting ugly. I think this is going to be a blowout. It's unfortunate for It's unfortunate for Boise State. It's going to affect how we talk about non-Power 5 schools getting home field advantage and auto buy for years to come. But the Ashton Jeanty story, the Boise State story, is coming to an end right here.
It's an interesting matchup for Boise State because they haven't played a ton of great teams this season. They played Oregon early in the year, which is not the same Oregon team that now currently exists.
Yeah,
and
that was the Oregon team who was getting in a dogfight with Idaho. So.
Exactly. And they only lost by 3 points in that one. And Ashton Jeanty showed up in a big way. But other than that, they haven't really played another top dog. And Penn State is one of those top dogs. One of the 4 best, most talented teams in the country when it comes to college football. And you mentioned it. They have a quarterback who likely will be a first-round pick next year, depending on how next season goes. They have 2 very high-level running backs. They have an elite front seven. Abdul Carter is probably going to be a top 10 pick this year. So just from a talent perspective, I don't think this Boise State offense is dynamic enough to overcome the talent Penn State has on defense and then what Penn State offers on offense. Penn State doesn't have the most talented receivers, but they do still have one of the best tight ends in college football, 2 great running backs, and a very good quarterback. So overall, I think the talent is a little bit much for Boise State to overcome unless they truly just grind out 3-4 yards in a cloud of dust and play possession football the entirety of the game.
And I'm questionable if that could happen indoors in the Dome. The issue with Boise State, if their path to winning a playoff game is they need to be a home team in the first round, to be playing in that cold, frigid Boise environment on that blue turf field and just get some pass-happy team there and drag them down to the dirt and beat the hell out of them. That's how this team could have won a playoff game. They got an auto bye to the second round, which will probably be changed in later years. But it's just not going to happen because they've got to go play a better team in a dome at a neutral site. And Penn State's traveling better. I know Boise State, this is their biggest moment in franchise history and school history for football. It's not happening. So do we need to really dwell on it that much longer? Can we bounce on to the 3 big boys?
I mean, Penn State's a big boy.
Yeah, I know, but these other 3, the group of 5, or the group of 4s, it's just not the same.
They're bigger boys?
They're bigger boys. Cam Scadadoo is the biggest of boys. His head is larger than even yours. It's the biggest cranium I have ever seen. They got to custom order his helmets. They got to shrink down a bathtub, just knock off half of it, and stick it on that man's head. And he is going to be banging that head off the Texas defense. The Texas front seven, who did such a good job of keeping the Clemson run game in check and was forcing Cade Klubnik to attempt a whole lot of throws against him in the last round. I think Arizona State has got a better chance than most people are giving them credit for. They are a very good defensive team. They won a Power 4 conference. They deserve to be here. They didn't just get hand-waved on an auto bid. They would have been a top 12 team. I would take this team to beat Alabama at a neutral site, certainly if it was at Arizona State. This is a very deep squad. You look over there at Texas, Quinn Ewers, on-horse painkillers. His ankle is in a full body cast. He is not moving the same, and he's not feeling things the same. He did not look fantastic through the air against a very weak Clemson defense. I think Arizona State has a better scheme and a better defense than the Tigers. Sam Leavitt may legitimately outplay him through the air. This is going to be a competitive game. What it's going to come down to is the area of this Texas strength, their offensive line, who's getting away with a ton of holding penalties. I think the referees will continue to allow that to happen for both teams They're going to let this one be a physical game. There are not going to be a ton of whistles. They're going to let the gentlemen play. And once Wiz and Blue get going with that head of steam with those big gaps, they are more talented, more explosive than Scadaboo. They're going to have a lot more high-end speed. They're going to go for those long runs, which Camp simply can't. So I think Texas wins this game due to the strength of their running game, which is a weird thing to say about the Sun Devils because that's their best quality. But it's going to be very competitive. I think they keep it close, time possession game, but just those few explosive plays go the way of Texas. Kind of how it went against Clemson.
While it'd be awesome to see Arizona State win and to see Cam Scadaboo run wild, something you didn't mention is just the strength of this Texas run defense. You take a look at what they did to Clemson. Clemson was averaging over 5 yards a carry heading into this game. They held them to 3.2 yards a carry, and the only reason they stayed in the game is because Cade Klubnik threw the ball all over the field and had a big day passing. Against Texas A&M, they were a great rushing team this year, held them to only 3.6 yards a carry. So Cam Scadaboo, who has been dominant all season long, is not going to be nearly as effective, and I just don't trust the Arizona State passing attack to air it out all over the field to even keep it close in the same way that Clemson did.
I think it could be a very similar game to the Clemson game if we want to get right down to it. I think they'll be a little bit more effective on the ground, maybe a little bit less effective through the air. Not much faith in Levitt on that side of the room. Shame, shame. He is going to do good things against this Texas defense. Maybe not great things, but good things. I think it's going to be a one-score game late. Maybe Texas is leading. Maybe Arizona State's leading. I think just Texas blows it open. They get a 50, 60-yard rushing touchdown to either seal the game, put more points on the board, send it to overtime, and then in overtime, the better team almost always wins. I'm also picking Texas to win this game, but this is going to be way more competitive than the Boise State-Penn State game. On to Notre Dame, Georgia. A battle between two of the marquee brands in college football, the Gold Helmets versus the G's. And the story about this game for Georgia's offense is how are they going to look without Carson Beck? And I'll be blunt, I do not care who they insert into that offense, who they put out on the field, they will be better off without Beck. Beck was getting by on his talent and his name for a long time. He was not a productive quarterback the final 2 months of the season. He was the reason Georgia was always trailing headed into the second half. He helped bring him back, sure, but a larger part of that was their elite offensive line and them having one of the 2 or 3 best defenses in all of college football. Point to any position group on that team and you will see a first-round player. They are talented top to bottom in a way no other team in the nation is. They are simply good enough to overcome terrible quarterback play. Now, looking at Notre Dame, their secondary, best in college football, only rivaled by Ohio State and Georgia. Their front seven, a little bit shaky in my opinion. You can run on this team. The Georgia offensive line is getting pushed into that second level. They are getting their hats on linebackers, and they are going to open up rushing lanes. Indiana kept this game relatively close with Notre Dame from a defensive standpoint. Until they were just left on the field by their offense, they were hanging with the Fighting Irish. Notre Dame's not going to score on Georgia. They're not cracking 15 points on this Dogs defense. I don't think it's going to happen. Their offense is simply not on the same level. Their passing attack isn't there. Their rushing attack isn't there. The only thing they have is maybe some top-end speed out of the backfield. But even then, I think Georgia's players can run them down. This may be a low-scoring game because of the uncertainty at the quarterback position from Georgia, but I do think they just pound this one out. And it kind of looks like the Indiana game looked last round, but in reverse. Georgia's win this one, I'll say 25-10, 25-15, in a game which is not 1 or 2 scores. A clear, decisive victory for the Dogs.
If Georgia was to lose this game, I think it would be because Gunnar Stockton just implodes. The moment becomes too big for him, and he has a complete disaster class where he throws 3 interceptions, and Notre Dame gets a pick 6 or 2 off of that. Because you mentioned it already, Georgia's defense is extremely talented. We know Notre Dame has a very good rushing offense, one of the best rushing offenses in the country, but look what Georgia's defense did to Texas this year. Texas's run game disappeared twice when they played Georgia, and Georgia's going to be able to do that to Notre Dame. So I think because of the talent on the defensive side of the ball, it is going to make it a lot harder for Notre Dame to utilize their biggest strength, and I think that's going to be too much for them to overcome, but it's always a wild card. Will Gunnar Stockton?
I would say Riley Leonard is just as likely to implode in that Marcus Freeman-led team than any quarterback in the country. There's a greater chance for implosion there than anywhere else based off Notre Dame's storied history of ineptitude in the biggest moments. Now, game of the week, game of the month, game of the year. Some are saying game of the century. The rematch between Ohio State and Georgia. We know how that last game ended. A Will Howard slide because he doesn't know how to keep track of the clock. A 1-point win in Oregon by the Mighty Ducks. This week, going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be the same game. Oregon's not going to get lucky. They're not going to need the luck because they are just going to go out there and physically bully the Buckeyes. Since that game, the Ohio State offensive line has been ravaged by injuries. Oregon's front seven still firing on all cylinders. They will generate a ton of pressure on Will Howard. Maybe not as much as that four-man front in Michigan did, but I think Dan Lanning can dial up a few blitzes, get some pressure going on Howard to make him uncomfortable, make him take those bad sacks. In the quarterback matchup, there is no comparison. Dylan Gabriel is the far superior passer of the football to Will Howard. That's not conversation. Maybe the Ohio State faithful would like to argue, oh, Will Howard's legs make up for that fact. I don't think so. When you're playing a defense where everybody on the field, from the nose tackle to the free safety, can run you down in space, that athletic speed advantage at the quarterback position really doesn't matter. Will Howard is not having a long run this game. He will be hawked down mercilessly by these speedy Oregon players. You look at the offensive skill players. Obviously, I'm going to give the advantage at running back to Ohio State. Some people will give the advantage at wide receiver to Ohio State. I think that's a pretty even matchup to me. I know Ohio State wide receiver best wide receiver ever, and he's a true freshman. They do this every few years. I'm not sold on it. I know how good Walker is. I know how good the rest of these Oregon receivers are. It's not that lopsided. I think Dan Lanning is a better coach. He's got better intestinal fortitude, and he's built for these moments more than Ryan Day. I think Ryan Day, if it comes down to it, is going to make a blunder. I think Oregon is just the better team. So I'll pick them winning by a touchdown. Ohio State being favored in this game just because they salted the earth with a Tennessee team who's not used to playing cold weather is ridiculous.
I don't think Ohio State really deserves to be favored in the way that they are. I think a lot of people saw their last game where they just lit the world on fire, threw the ball all over the field. They lit Tennessee up, made it look like Tennessee didn't even deserve to sniff being a top 25 team, let alone being a top 10 team in college football. They looked phenomenal. They fixed the mistakes they made against Michigan. They had better run plays. They ran the ball effectively. They threw the ball effectively. They did everything at a very high level, which has led people to believe that they can beat Oregon. But Oregon, they're the number one team in the country for a reason. They haven't lost a game all year long for a reason. They are very well coached. They are very talented. They have speed all over the place on offense and defense. Their quarterback was in the Heisman conversation, so he's been playing at a high level all season long, and they are a talented team. This is not just someone that Ohio State's going to be able to walk through because they lit someone up last week and have the most expensive roster in all of college football. So I think it is a little crazy that I think they're favored by 2.5 points.
Make that line as large as possible. It's at the Rose Bowl. I want Ohio State favored by 100 points in this one. Give Dan Lanning as much bulletin board material as you can and see what happens.
I think Dan Lanning's going to have Oregon fired up and playing at a high level. They're just as talented as this Ohio State team. Maybe don't have as big a names as Ohio State does.
Some pretty big names. They got some pretty big names.
But I do think Oregon is going to be able to win and beat Ohio State.
And I want to touch on this before we close. Tez Johnson, I already mentioned him, phenomenal receiver, first-round guy, could conceivably be a top 15 pick if he tests well. Evan Stewart had a massive game against the Buckeyes. I went for, I believe, 150 yards and a touchdown the last time they played Ohio State. Maybe you think Ohio State can bracket Tez Johnson, just put a safety on, put their best corner on him, get Caleb Downs involved, and just take him away. They're not taking both these guys away. Either you sell out to stop Johnson, or Evan Stewart is once again going to light you up through the air. One of those two players, though, will be the decisive factor for this Oregon team and why they win. It all depends on who Ohio State decides to let beat them. Either way, Oregon's winning. Ryan Day, might be time to pick up a Chinese dictionary, pal. It's over for you. Those were our thoughts on the college football playoffs. Let us know what you think down below. Are we wrong about Ohio State? Is Boise State going to pull off the improbable upset with Ashton Genty? Use code Thicc with 2 C's on Underdog to double your first deposit with bonus cash up to $1,000, and we will see you in the next one.